How We Kept Thanksgiving at Oldtown by Harriet Beecher Stowe. When the apples were all gathered, and the cider was all made, and the yellow pumpkins were rolled in from many a hill in billows of gold, and the corn was husked, and the labors of the season were done, and the warm late days of the Indian summer came in, dreamy and calm and still, with just enough to crisp the ground of a morning, but with warm trances of benignant sunny hours at noon, there came over the community a sort of genial repose of spirit, a sense of something accomplished, and of a new golden mark made in advance of the calendar of life. And the deacon began to say to the minister of a Sunday, "I suppose it is about time for Thanksgiving proclamation." Conversation at this time began to turn on high and solemn culinary mysteries and receipts of wondrous power and virtue. New modes of elaborating squash pies and quince tarts were now oft-times carefully discussed at the evening firesides by Aunt Louise and Aunt Keziah, and notes seriously compared the experiences of certain other aunties of high repute in such matters. I noticed that on these occasions their voices often fell into mysterious whispers, and that receipts of especial power and sanctity were communicated in tones so low as entirely to escape the vulgar ear. I still remember the solemn shake of the head with which my Aunt Lois conveyed to Miss Mehable Rossiter the critical properties of mace in relation to its powers as producing in corn fritters a suggestive resemblance to oysters. As ours was an oyster-getting district, and as that charming bivalve was perfectly easy to come at, the interest of such an imitation can be accounted for only by the fondness of the human mind for works of art, forasmuch as a week beforehand we children were employed in chopping mince for pies to the most wearisome fineness, and in pounding cinnamon, allspice, and cloves in a great lignum vitae mortar, and the sound of this pounding chopped echoed through all the rafters of the old house in a hearty and vigorous cheer, most refreshing to our spirits. In those days there were none of the thousand ameliorations of the labors of housekeeping which have since arisen. No ground and prepared spices and sweet herbs. Everything came into our hands in the rough and in bulk, and in the reducing of it into a state for use was deemed one of the appropriate labors of childhood. Even the very salt we used in cooking was rock salt, which we required to wash and dry and pound and sift before it became fit for use. At other times of the year we sometimes murmured at these labors, and those that were supposed to usher in great Thanksgiving festival were always entered into enthusiasm. There were signs of richness all around us: stoning of raisins, cutting of citron, slicing of candied orange peel. Yet all these were only dawnings and imitations of what was coming during the week of real preparation. After the governor's proclamation had been read, the glories of that proclamation we knew beforehand, the Sunday it was to be read, and walked to church with alacrity, filled with gorgeous and vague expectations. The cheering anticipation sustained us through what seemed to us the long waste of the sermon and prayers. When at last the auspicious moment approached, and the last quaver of the last hymn had died out, the whole house rippled with a general movement of complacency, and a satisfied smile of pleased expectation might be seen gleaming on the faces of all young people, like a ray of sunshine through a garden of flowers. Thanksgiving now was dawning. We children poked one another, and fairly giggled with unreproved delight as we listened to the crackle of the slowly unfolding document. That great sheet of paper impressed us as something supernatural, by reason of its mighty size, and by the broad seal of the state affixed thereto. And when the minister read therefrom, by His Excellency, the Governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, a proclamation, our mirth was with difficulty repressed by admonitory glances from our sympathetic elders. Then, after a solemn enumeration of the benefits which the Commonwealth had that year received at the hands of divine providence, came at last the naming of the eventual day, and at the end of all, the imposing heraldic words, God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And then, as the congregation broke up and dispersed, all went their several ways and schemes, with mirth and feasting in their heads. And now came on the week in earnest. In the very watches of the night preceding Monday morning, a preternatural stir below stairs and thunder of the pounding barrel announced that the washing was to be got out of the way before daylight, so as to give ample scope to the and room enough for the more pleasing duties of the season. The making of pies at this period assumed vast proportion that verged upon the sublime. Pies were made by 40s and 50s and hundreds, and made of everything on the earth and under the earth. The pie is an English institution, which, planted on American soil, forthwith ran rampant, and burst forth onto an untold variety of genera and species, not merely the old traditional mince pie, but 1,000 strictly American seedlings from that main stock, evinced the power of American housewives to adapt old institutions to new uses. Pumpkin pies, cranberry pies, huckleberry pies, cherry pies, green currant pies, peach, pear, and plum pies, custard pies, apple pies, Marlborough pudding pies, pies with top crust and pies without, pies adorned with all sorts of fanciful fluttings and architectural strips laid across and around, and otherwise varied attested the boundless fertility of the feminine mind when once let loose in a given direction. Fancy the heat and vigor of the great pan formation, when Aunt Lois and Aunt Keziah and my mother and grandmother, all in ecstasies of great inspiration, ran, bustled, and hurried, mixing and rolling and tasting, consulting, alternately setting up children to work when anything could be made of us, and then chasing us all out of the kitchen when our misinformed childhood ventured into take too many liberties with sacred mysteries. Then out we would all fly at the kitchen door like sparks from a blacksmith's window. On these occasions, as there was a great looseness in the police department over us children, we usually found a ready refuge at Miss Mehebel's with Tina, who, confident of the strength of her position with Paulie, inviting us into the kitchen, and with the air of a mistress led us around to view the proceedings there. A genius for entertaining was one of Tina's principal characteristics, and she did not fail to make free with raisins or citrons or whatever came to hand, in the spirit of hospitality, at which Polly seriously demurred. That worthy woman occasionally felt the inconvenience of the state of subjugation to which the little elf had somehow or other reduced her, and sometimes rattled her chains fiercely, scolding with a vigor which rather alarmed us, but which Tina minded not a whit. Confident of her own powers, she would, in the very midst of her wrath, mimic her to her face with such irrepressible drollery as to cause the torrent of reproof to end in a dissonant laugh, accompanied by a submissive cry for quarter. I declare, Tina Percival, she said to her one day, you're saucy enough to physic a hornbug. I never did see the beater of you. If Miss Mehebel don't keep you in better order, I don't see what's to become of any of us. Why, what did come of you before I came? Was the undismayed reply. You know, Polly, you and Auntie both were just as lonesome as you could be till I came here, and you never had such pleasant times in your life as you had since I've been here. You're a couple of old beauties, both of you, and you know how to get along with me. But come, boys, let's take our raisins and go up to the garret and play Thanksgiving. In the corner of the kitchen, during all these days, the jolly old oven roared and crackled in great volcanic billows of flame, snapping and gurgling, as if the old fellow entered with joyful sympathy into the frolic of the hour, and then, his great heart being once warmed up, He brooded over successive generations of pies and cakes, which went in raw and came out cooked, till butteries and dressers and shelves and pastries were literally crowded with jostling abundance. A great cold northern chamber, where the sun never shone, and where in winter the snow sifted in at the window cracks, and ice and frost reigned with undisputed sway, was fitted up to the storehouse of these surplus treasures. There, frozen solid, and thus well preserved in their icy fetters, they formed a great respiratory for all the winter months, and the pies baked at Thanksgiving often came out fresh and with good, the violets of April. During this eventful preparation week, all the female part of my grandmother's household, as I had been remarked, were at a height above any ordinary state of mind. They moved about the house wrapped in a species of prophetic frenzy. It seemed to be considered a necessary feature of such festivals, that everybody should be in a hurry. Everything in the house should be turned bottom upwards with enthusiasm, so at least we children understood it, and we certainly did our part to keep the ball rolling. At this period, the constitutional activity of Uncle Falakim increased to a degree that might fairly be called preternatural. Thanksgiving time was the time for errands of mercy and benevolence through the country, and Uncle Flakim, immortal old rubber horse and rattling wagon, were on the full jump in tours of investigation into everybody's affairs in the region around, and returning, he would fly through our kitchen like the wind, leaving open the doors, upsettling whatever came in his way. Now a pan of milk, and now a basin of mince, talking rapidly, and forgetting only the point in every case that gave it significance, or enabled any one to put it any sort of use. When Aunt Lois checked his benevolent effusions by putting the test questions of practical efficiency, Uncle Flakim always remembered what he'd forgotten to inquire about that, and skipping through the kitchen and springing into his old wagon, would rattle off again on a full tilt to correct and amend his investigations. Moreover, my grandmother's kitchen at this time began to be haunted by those occasional hangers-on and retainers of uncertain fortunes, whom a full experience of her bountiful habits led to expect something at her hand at this time of the year. All the poor loafing tribes, Indian and half-Indian, who at other times wandered, selling baskets and other light wares, were sure to come back to Oldtown a little before Thanksgiving time, and report themselves to my grandmother's kitchen. The great hogshead of cider in the cellar, which my grandfather called the Indian hogshead, was on tap for all hours of the day, and many a mugful did I draw and dispense to the tribes that basked in the sunshine at our door. Aunt Lois never had a hearty conviction of the propriety of these arrangements, of my grandmother, who had a prodigious verbal memory, bore down upon her with such strings of quotations from the Old Testament that she was utterly routed. Now, says my Aunt Lois, I suppose we've got to have Betty Poganut and Sally Wagshamug and old Upskew and his wife, and the whole tribe down, roosting around our doors till we give 'em something. That's just Mother's way, and she always keeps a whole generation at our heels. How many times must I tell you, Lois, to read your Bible? Was my grandmother's rejoinder, and loud over the sound of pounding and chopping in the kitchen could be heard the voice of her quotations. If there be among you a poor man in any of the gates of the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not harden thy heart, nor shut thy hand from thy poor brother. Thou shalt surely give him, and thy heart shall not be grieved when thou givest him, because that is for the thing the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all thy works, for the poor shall never cease from out of the land. These words seemed to resound like a sort of heraldic proclamation, to call around us all the softly shiftless class, who, for some reason or other, are never to be found with anything in hand at the moment that is wanted. There, to be sure, said Aunt Lois, One day when our preparations were in full blast, there comes Sam Lawson down the hill, nimsy as ever. He'll have his doleful story to tell, and Mother will give him one of the turkeys. And so, of course, it fell out. Sam came in with his usual air of plaintive assurance, and seated himself a contemplative spectator in the chimney corner, regardless of the looks and signs of unwelcome on the part of Aunt Lois. Lordy Massey, how prosperous everything does seem here, he said in musing tones, over his inevitable mug of cider. So different from his our house. There's Hepsy, she's all in stew, and I just been and got her 37 cents worth of nutmegs. Yet she says she don't see how she's to keep Thanksgiving, and she's down on me about it, as she 'twas my fault. Yet see, last winter our old gobbler got froze, you know, Miss Badger, and their cold night we had last winter. Well, I was off with Jake Marshall that night, you see. And I can't finish this story, sorry. This will be, if you want to read the rest of how we kept Thanksgiving at Oldtown, you can read it on AmericanLiterature.com. But I'm not going to finish it because I just got tired of reading. I think the story was too long, but I don't know. So I think I'm kind of getting tired of reading short stories. I think I should make some other content, like do more stock market analysis or something. But let me know in the comments below what you thought of the story. Please subscribe to this channel to be part of the community. Please like this video. It really helps the channel out a lot. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.